Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back to my newest video. And in this occasion, I want to discuss about the relativity of moral values. Moral relativism is the idea that there is no universal or absolute set of moral principles. It's a version of morality that advocates to each her own, and those who follow it say, "Who am I to judge?" Moral relativism can be understood in several ways. Descriptive moral relativism, also known as cultural relativism, says that moral standards are culturally defined, which is generally true. Indeed, there may be a few values that seem nearly universal, such as honesty and respect. But many differences appear across cultures when people evaluate moral standards around the world. Meta-ethical moral relativism states that there are no objective grounds for preferring the moral values of one culture over another. Societies make their moral choices based on their unique beliefs, customs, and practices. And in fact, people tend to believe that the right moral values are the values that exist in their own culture. Normative moral relativism is the idea that all societies should accept each other's differing moral values, given that there are no universal moral principles. Most philosophers disagree, however. For example, just because bribery is okay in some cultures doesn't mean that other cultures cannot rightfully condemn it. The French philosopher Marquis de Sade wrote, "Believe me, Eugene, the words vice and virtue supplies us only with local meanings. There is no action, however. By there, you may picture it that is truly criminal, or one that can really be called virtuous, might conversely be regarded as crime among us. There is no atrocity that hasn't been deified, no virtue that hasn't been stigmatized." Moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint. For instance, that of a culture or a historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. It has often been associated with other claims about morality, notably the thesis that different cultures often exhibit radically different moral values. The denial that there are universal moral values shared by every human society, and the insistence that we should refrain from passing moral judgments on beliefs and practices characteristic of cultures other than our own. Relativistic views of moral first found expression in 5th century BCE Greece, but they remained largely dormant until the 19th and 20th centuries. During this time, a number of factors converged to make moral relativism appears plausible. These included a new appreciation of cultural diversity prompted by anthropological discoveries, the declining importance of religion in modernized societies, an increasingly critical attitude toward colonialism and its assumption of moral superiority over the colonized societies, and growing skepticism toward any form of moral objectivism, given the difficulty of proving value judgments the way one proves factual claims. For some, moral relativism, which relativizes the truth of moral claims, follows logically from a broader cognitive relativism that relativizes truth in general. Many moral relativists, however, take the fact-value distinction to be fundamental. A common, albeit negative, reason for embracing moral relativism is simply the perceived untenability of moral objectivism. Every attempt to establish a single, objectively valid and universally binding set of moral principles runs up against formidable objections. A more positive argument, sometimes advanced in defense of moral relativism is that it promotes tolerance since it encourages us to understand other cultures on their own terms. Critics claim that relativists typically exaggerate the degree of diversity among cultures, since superficial difference often masks underlying shared agreements. In fact, some say that there is a core set of universal values that any human culture must endorse if it is to flourish. Moral relativists are also accused of inconsistently claiming that there are no universal moral norms, while appealing to a principle of tolerance as a universal norm. In the eyes of many critics, though, the most serious objection to moral relativism is that it implies the pernicious consequence that anything goes. Slavery is as according to the norms of a slave society. Sexist practices are right according to the values of a sexist culture. Relativists often do claim that an action or judgment, etc., is morally required of a person. For example, if a person believes that abortion is morally wrong, then it is wrong for her. In other words, it would be morally wrong for Susan to have an abortion if Susan believed that abortion is always morally wrong. Without some sort of non-relative standard to appeal to, the critics argue we have no basis for critical moral appraisals of our own culture's conventions, or for judging one society to be better than another. Naturally, most moral relativists typically reject the assumption that such judgments require a non-relativistic foundation. Well guys, thank you for lending me your ears. I think that's all. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.